The fleet came in silent like a moving night sky, swallowing the stars one by one, until only Earth remained below, shining fragile and beautiful against the void. Asha Verne stood in mission control, her palms sweating against the console but her eyes calm. She was not a soldier, not a hero, just a coordinator from the orbital network, yet everyone in the room looked to her when the warning beacons lit red. The invasion fleet was larger than anything human eyes had ever seen ships made of. Living metal burning in ultraviolet hues that hurt to look at. The Concord Wolves, they called themselves, conquerors of 7 worlds, and now Earth was their 8th. The feeds from Mars and Luna were static, burned by the first wave. Only the deep relay from Europa kept whispering, "They are coming and we cannot stop them." Asha pressed the transmit key and spoke into the void. "This is Earth. Stand down or learn what belief can do." Her voice carried through static, and laughter came back from the wolves. They mocked her, saying belief does not stop plasma, and their commander said they would take the planet intact for study. Asha looked up at the global screen cities glowing like constellations across continents, and she thought how small they were and how impossible it was to protect everything. Yet she had something they did not: faith in human stubbornness and in the strange habit of turning fear into invention. The orbital yards were old, full of repair tugs and freight drones, not weapons, but she had been preparing for this day since Helios fell. She called the plan Starborn Defense, a name that sounded poetic and impossible, just enough to make people remember. She ordered every tug to leave its dock, every drone to climb. Toward the upper atmosphere they formed a wide, invisible grid, stretching from pole to pole. No guns, no missiles, only mirrors. She called it the Sunward Array. Each plate polished from station scraps, tuned to catch solar light and turn it into a pressure field. It would not destroy ships, but it could move them. Confuse sensors, make gravity lie. Humans had learned long ago that wars were not won only with fire. Sometimes they were won with tricks and timing. The first of the wolf cruisers crossed the moon line and opened their lances, beams bright enough to slice the night sky. People on Earth watched streaks of fire across the heavens, thinking meteors falling. But they were not meteors. They were warnings. Asha stood unmoved. She told her technicians to rotate the array 30 degrees. The mirrors tilted, and sunlight spilled across the field, forming a halo around Earth. The wolf beams bent slightly, refracted by invisible force. It made no sense to them. They fired again. The light bent again. They started to calculate, thinking humans had built a shield, when in truth it was an illusion built from patience. And Asha's comms officer whispered that the wolves were deploying planetary missiles. She nodded and said, "Keep the signal open." She wanted them to hear. She said to every listener across the system, "We will not strike first, but we will finish last." She sent the same message through public networks. The whole world heard it. Miners on Mars, pilots above the Atlantic, children in underground shelters, even old soldiers in hospitals. They all repeated the words under their breath. "We will finish last." The wolves did not understand, but they felt something cold move through their ranks, because no species had ever dared speak to them with such stillness. In orbit, the tug pilots maneuvered their ships like dancers, each reflecting light into new paths. The array shimmered, and from the ground it looked like sunrise wrapping Earth. Twice the wolf vanguard turned its guns downward again, and the array responded with glare so bright it blinded half their sensors. One ship fired on another by mistake, thinking it was a hidden missile. The chain reaction of panic spread faster than orders. Asha watched in silence. The wolves regrouped, angry now, preparing for full assault. But her second command waited on her lips. She wanted them close, very close, before she showed them the next card. She thought of Helios and the children who had sung through the dark. She thought of the words they had left behind. Believe, and she whispered them. Now the room around her was shaking from the resonance of orbital impacts, but her heart was steady. Humans were fragile, but when they stood together, they became something that terrified the cold, vast galaxy. Not monsters, not conquerors, just people who refused to kneel when every star told them to. And as the wolves crossed into Earth orbit, the first phase of Starborn Defense was complete, and the second waited like a held breath, ready to change the war forever. The wolves entered low orbit like a black tide curling around the planet, their ships casting long shadows across the upper atmosphere. Their commander, a being called Vale of the Core, watched Earth through his glass mask and said to his lieutenants, "The humans build illusions, but illusions cannot bleed." He ordered the lances to charge, and from the control pits below him came the hum of 1,000 power cores aligning. Asha Verne stood at her console. As the alarms blared, the array was still holding, but its reflective pattern would burn out soon. She could see plasma distortions flickering across the edges of the field, and she knew the wolves would adapt within minutes because they were old, at war and patient in cruelty. She told her operators to stay calm, every tone of her voice steady like a heartbeat, and behind her the technicians obeyed. Even when the lights trembled over their heads, the human gift was not strength or speed. It was rhythm, the rhythm that kept hands steady while fear screamed for retreat. The first barrage came and tore through the outer ring of the array. Several tugs vanished like fireflies smashed against stone, their pilot's last words still echoing. On the open line hold position, hold pattern. Asha closed her eyes for half a breath and then spoke. Phase 2. Beginner signal jumped from satellite to satellite until it reached the far side of the moon, where hundreds of small ships waited hidden among the debris of forgotten missions, old exploration craft, supply shuttles. Even a few museum pieces refitted with new drives, each carrying a prism node no bigger than a suitcase. When the signal reached them, they woke together. The prisms scattered, beams into the array refracting sunlight 1,000 different ways until the entire upper atmosphere shimmered like a living ocean. The wolf sensors failed again. They saw 100 phantom targets, 1,000 heat ghosts. Their computers screamed contradictions, and in that confusion human fighters moved. These were not warships by design. They were hybrids built in secret from cargo haulers and mining rigs. But inside them sat pilots who had learned to fly through storms and plasma shear. Captain Rhea Calder led the first wave, her small ship Brightwind. Darting between the wolf formations, she was laughing through the open channel, not out of joy but out of sheer disbelief that humanity was standing up to God. She said to her wing, "Follow the rhythm of Earth," and they followed her, weaving through burning clouds, leaving trails of static that made the wolves fire at air. Rhea saw one of their cruisers try to lock on, and she dove hard, skimming the edge of the array, the mirror. Light wrapped around her hull, and for a heartbeat she vanished. Even the sensors on Earth lost her. Then she reappeared behind the cruiser and fired a magnetic spike into its flank. It did not destroy the ship, but it ripped through the guidance core, and the massive vessel spun away, colliding with another. The sky filled with wreckage, and the wolves began to hesitate. On the ground, Asha watched data flicker across the screens. She whispered to herself one truth that had kept her alive since. Helios, we get clever. She knew the wolves were not beaten, only stunned, their coordination still too strong, their command networks unbroken. She needed a distraction powerful enough to pull their gaze away from the planet. She looked to her communication officer and said, "Send the story." And the officer froze for a second, then nodded. The story was not a code, not a weapon. It was a memory, a voice. Recording from Helios, children singing in harmony, words simple enough for any mind to understand. Believe, hold fast, keep breathing. They transmitted it across every open frequency, human and alien, and within seconds it echoed through the wolf ships, a sound so human, so strange that their captains ordered their comms shut. But it was too late. The frequency resonated through the neural mesh of their systems, confusing signals again. Their own translators misfiring, turning the song into shapes of thought. They could not silence. Rhea saw the hesitation as an opening. She called out over the radio. "They are listening, hit them now." Her small fleet surged through the gaps, each pilot guiding missiles by hand, vision, and instinct. The sky became chaos, a storm of light and metal. The wolves fought back with fury, their lances carving scars across the horizon. But every time one human ship fell, another rose to fill the gap. The balance of courage was shifting, and Vael of the Core saw it. He screamed through his comms that the humans were diseased. Their songs a contagion of defiance, he ordered, his dreadnoughts forward to crush the planet. But when he looked down, he saw something impossible. The continents glowing with synchronized lights, entire cities pulsing in rhythm with the same melody, the same beat of belief. Earth itself seemed alive, singing back to the fleet in silence. Asha stood in the control room, her voice breaking but firm. She told her teams to maintain the transmission, no matter what. She could hear the hum of the reactors below and the crackling of dying circuits. Yet she felt only calm humanity was no longer afraid of the dark. It had made the dark afraid of them. And as the wolves charged for their final descent, the array shifted one last time, redirecting every photon, every fragment of sunlight into a single wide flare that split the sky in half, blinding their approach and forcing them to retreat higher to regroup. For the first time in centuries, the wolves had been pushed back by a species they called primitive, and they did not yet know that the true storm had only begun. The wolves gathered above the planet, their fleet broken into scattered bands of fury and disbelief. Their dreadnoughts still held formation, but cracks ran. Through their command lines, Viel of the Corps stood within his bridge, surrounded by the echo of human music, still trapped in his neural interface. The sound refused to fade, each pulse a reminder of something he could not name. He snarled orders to jam the frequencies and erase the melody from every system. But the technicians hesitated for the first time, their hands shaking, because the song had touched something inside them that no control implant could drown. Below the fleets, Rhea Calder guided the bright wind through the debris. Her hull scarred her oxygen filters, screaming. Yet her eyes alive, she whispered a promise to the stars that she would not let Earth fall. She had fought enough battles to know courage and madness were often the same thing, and right now humanity needed both. She turned to her navigator, Malik Anwar, who grinned through blood on his cheek, and said, "Tell command we are still flying." Asha Verney heard the voice crackle through static and smiled despite the exhaustion around her. She had been awake for 30 hours straight, but her mind was sharper than ever. She pulled up the orbital map, watching the wolves regroup beyond the magnetosphere. They were building something, a wide, shimmering halo like a storm wall. She recognized the pattern. It was an entropic curtain, a field that erased digital signatures away to blind sensors and isolate planets. They meant to cut Earth off from every signal, every relay, to make them deaf, and then strike. She looked at the data feed and whispered, "They want to silence belief itself." Her engineers looked to her, waiting for orders. She said, "Contact Brightwind. Tell them to break through the curtain and reach the far side. We will send the last package." The words "last package" hung heavy in the room because everyone knew it meant the weapon they swore never to use. The Brightwind accelerated, engines roaring through electromagnetic drag. The curtain appeared ahead like molten glass rippling through the void. Malik muttered prayers under his breath, but Rhea kept her focus. The human mind had always bent around fear, shaping it into purpose the moment the curtain touched their hull. Alarms went red, the ship's systems flickered, and the stars vanished. Only the sound of their own breathing filled the cabin. She gripped the manual control stick and trusted instinct rather than instruments. She navigated by memory of constellations seen in childhood, the old habit of sailors who read stars before technology was born on the other side of the field. Light returned, and with it the image of something vast, a second fleet hidden behind the curtain. But this one not alien. Their own ships refitted and armed, bearing the insignia of the Starborn Corps experimental defense units, long rumored but never confirmed. Asha's voice came over the line saying, "Welcome to Phase 3. The secret had been simple. The Starborn Corps was humanity's wild card, a project born from the ruins of Helios. Combining living data with human thought patterns, each ship semi-conscious, bound to a human pilot, willing to merge minds for clarity. Rhea stared at the flagship Helios Dawn, its hull etched with patterns that pulsed like heartbeats. The fleet had waited hidden for years, feeding on solar energy, learning patience. Now it was awake. The wolves' scanners detected movement, and their panic rippled. Viel of the Corps shouted to his lieutenants to crush the new fleet before it could form lines, but the Starborn ships did not fight in lines. They moved like instinct, like thought, leaping between trajectories in ways no algorithm could predict. Rhea joined their network, feeling hundreds of human minds touch hers, each pulse a different rhythm, a miner from Europa, a student from Mumbai, a farmer from the Great Plains, all linked by one shared idea: we stand together. The battle that followed was chaos, made into beauty. The wolves fired their plasma waves and found them folding against mirrored wings. The Starborn ships replied not with weapons but with resonance pulses that bent trajectories, causing the enemy's fire to curve harmlessly into void. Rhea felt her own heartbeat sync with the fleet, her mind stretching beyond its limits. She saw flashes of other pilots smiling, sweating, whispering fragments of songs. The same melody that had once frightened the wolves now used as coordination tool. The sound of humanity believing in itself. Vael of the Corps realized too late that he was no longer facing soldiers. He was facing a living idea, and ideas could not be destroyed. He screamed to his generals to activate the conductor, a massive vessel at the center of his armada, carrying a psychic core able to broadcast fear itself across battlefields. When the conductor awoke, the stars dimmed. It projected waves of dread strong enough to make sensors fail and hearts freeze. The Starborn network staggered. Rhea felt her breath falter. Malik shouted for her to stay with him. The link flickered, but Asha from Earth spoke through the channel. Her voice quiet and human, saying, "Listen to me, all of you. This is what they fear. They fear that you will keep believing when every reason says, stop, hold fast, and remember what? You fight for not glory, not vengeance, but each other." And in that moment, every pilot, every ship, every human listening grounded themselves again. The fear washed through them but did not drown them. The conductor's signal began to distort, as if the concept of fear itself was losing meaning when faced with human stubbornness. Rhea felt tears on her face, though she could not tell if they were hers or the ship's. She pushed the bright wind forward, engines blazing straight toward the conductor, ready to end the nightmare. Because in the silence between heartbeats she understood that the galaxy would never be the same after this battle. The bright wind moved through the storm of shattered metal, like a living spark burning against a tide that wanted to erase it. The conductor loomed ahead, an ocean of black steel with veins of violet energy pulsing through its core. Every beat of that light carried waves of despair meant to crush minds from a distance. Rhea felt it pressing into her chest, whispering that resistance was useless, whispering that humans were a fragile dream in a cruel universe. But she gritted her teeth and answered with memory. She remembered Earth's sunrise through the cracked window of her training dorm. She remembered Malik joking that fear was just imagination turned against you. She remembered Asha's voice over the comm saying, "Belief is not hope. Belief is work." And she kept moving, her hands shaking on the controls as the bright wind cut through the debris like a blade through fog. Inside the conductor, Vael of the Corps stood before the psychic core, a swirling sphere of liquid crystal surrounded by neural conduits. He had served the pallid choir all his life. A servant who believed their control was divine. Now he felt it slipping. He could hear the human song threading through the static in his implants, every beat wrong, every chord an insult to perfection, yet it would not fade. He turned to his sub-commanders and ordered the purge. Of all ships infected by human resonance, the bridge lights flickered as his lieutenants obeyed, vaporizing their own vessels to contain the contagion. But it was too late. Belief had already spread like fire through their fleet. Not as words, not as data, but as rhythm, the one thing the choir could never predict: the timing of a human heart down on Earth. Asha stood before the central terminal, where the gate network pulsed like veins of blue light spreading through the crust. The plan had always been desperate. The gate had been meant as a shield, a barrier to block psychic interference. But Asha was about to turn it inside out and make it a mirror. She told her engineers to synchronize the rhythm with every broadcast tower on the planet, from radio masts to deep space antennas. She wanted the entire biosphere to hum in unison. Her chief scientist warned her that it could overload every system on Earth. But Asha just smiled and said, "Then the stars will finally hear us." She thought of the message Rhea had carried from Helios years ago, a message about children who had sung through fear, and she decided that humanity would sing again. But this time, the galaxy would listen. As the signal built, Earth began to glow visible. Even from the moon, entire continents flickering with light waves moving like breath across oceans and mountains. The sound that came from the transmission was not language. It was the pulse of living things, the synchronized rhythm of millions refusing to kneel. The pallid choir, watching from their far orbit, recoiled. They had built their empire on fear and silence, and this was neither. It was defiance made music. Rhea felt the power surge through her ship, every system vibrating with the frequency. She realized the bright wind itself was resonating with Earth's pulse, and the ship began to sing back through its hull plates like a tuning fork. Malik laughed through tears, saying, "We are not fighting them anymore. We are teaching them," and Rhea answered through a grin. Then let us teach them well. She drove the bright wind into the conductor's outer hull and fired the anchor claws, embedding the ship deep into alien metal. The psychic field tore at her thoughts, but she forced herself to stay linked. She reached through the neural channel and saw inside the conductor's mind vast halls filled with screaming echoes of conquered worlds, and in the center of it a small trembling light, a memory of something pure. A childlike thought buried under centuries of obedience. She realized that Vael himself was not a monster, but a prisoner bound to the choir's hive since birth. She spoke to that light, not with words, but with feeling. She showed him images of earth rain over rooftops, laughter between enemies who became friends, and the look of a sky full of stars waiting to be understood, and something inside Vael cracked open. He staggered on his bridge, eyes wide, seeing for the first time, not conquest, but the terrible beauty of choice. The conductor's psychic pulse began to destabilize its frequency, shifting from fear to confusion. The wolves' ship surrounding it stopped firing. As if stunned, Vael reached for the control pedestal, and his claws trembled. He sent a final message to all fleets under the choir's command, saying, "The humans have no masters, they stand by will alone. And in that will, there is power greater than the void." Then he shut down the core himself. The psychic storm collapsed like a dying breath. Rhea and Malik were thrown back as energy waves tore through the hull. But the bright wind held together. Carried by the same rhythm that had become the heartbeat of a planet, Asha watched the readings flatten across her console and whispered it worked, but before relief could sink in, new signals appeared on the outer sensors. The choir itself was coming. Not just the wolves or the conductor, but the ancient architects of control. Hundreds of their shard ships, drifting from deep space like glass knives catching the reflection of Earth's light. They had come to reclaim what they owned. Asha stood taller and said, "Open every channel, because this time the galaxy will see who we are." The gate flared again, brighter than ever, linking every mind willing to believe, from Rhea on the bright wind to miners on Mars to children hiding in basements. Earth was no longer a planet alone. It was an idea unfolding in real time, and for the first time, the pallid choir felt something they had never known: uncertainty. The choir fleet filled the heavens like a moving wall of crystal blades, every fragment gleaming with the cold brilliance of stars. They were not an army. They were a belief in dominance made physical. They moved without heat, without noise, their silence more frightening than any scream. Asha Vern watched their formation spread across every orbital path, the sensors painting endless arcs of light around Earth. Her engineers whispered that they had no defense against numbers like that, but she did not answer. She simply pressed her palm against the console and felt the rhythm of the gate under her skin. She could feel it pulsing like a giant heart, stretching its reach through every broadcast line into the minds of billions. And she knew that humanity was already part of something larger, something the choir would never comprehend. They fought through obedience. Humans fought through love. In orbit, the bright wind drifted, half crippled, its hull leaking atmosphere, its engines reduced to sputtering flames. Malik Anwar floated beside the control panel, blood rising in slow red threads around him, but he was still smiling. Rhea Calder sat strapped to her chair, eyes fixed. On the void beyond the glass, the choir ships were forming a ring around the Earth, their shapes refracting light into spears. She whispered to Malik that they were about to see the end of everything, and he laughed, saying, "No, we are about to see the beginning." She turned to him, wanting to argue, but the words caught in her throat because even through pain, his eyes still carried belief. She remembered what Asha once told her. That belief is not blind. It is a decision made again and again, even when everything breaks. So she made the decision again and began to prepare the bright wind for one last run. Veil of the core drifted within the dying shell of the conductor. His body shattered, his mind torn from the choir's network. For the first time he was free. He could feel the psychic pressure of the approaching fleet pressing into his thoughts, demanding obedience. Yet he found that he could resist. He saw flashes of human memories still burning in his mind, their songs, their laughter, the strange warmth of courage. He reached into the conductor's remnants and activated a distress beacon tuned to human frequencies, hoping that Asha would see it and understand that not all enemies were beyond redemption. On Earth, the world was. Trembling tidal shifts, earthquakes, atmospheric static. The gate's energy was climbing beyond safe limits. The scientists begged Asha to shut it down before it tore the planet apart, but she refused. She said, if we fall, making history. She ordered the gate to amplify the signal and align it with the solar field, to use the entire sun as a transmitter. If the choir wanted to know what humanity was, then they would hear it sung across the system. The light of the sun flared brighter, carrying the rhythm of Earth across every ship, every sensor. It was no longer a signal. It was an emotion, and for the first time, the choir hesitated, because emotion to them was disorder, a kind of infection that dissolved hierarchy. The choir's command ship sent a psychic pulse strong enough to flatten mountains, their voice echoing through every human receiver saying, "You are dust and will return to dust." And Asha answered not with words but by standing. She took off her headset, walked to the center of the control floor and looked at the live feed of the Earth spinning below. Then she spoke softly to every human listener across the gate, saying, "They call us dust, but dust built the stars. Dust learned to sing, and dust will never kneel." Her voice carried through the resonance, and the gate responded, multiplying her words until they became a single heartbeat, thundering through space. Rhea felt the pulse reach her cockpit, her instruments flaring alive, the bright winds dying, engines reigniting with golden light. She laughed through tears, saying, "Asha, you did it." She pushed the throttles forward, and the ship shot toward the choir ring, leaving a trail of glowing plasma. She opened every broadcast channel and shouted to the Wolves ship still drifting between the choir lines, saying, "You have seen what we are, stand with us or stay slaves." The Wolves' captains listened, their crews torn between terror and hope. One by one, their lights changed formation, flipping from the choir network to human frequencies until dozens of them joined her. Run the sight of alien ships turning to defend Earth shocked the choir beyond comprehension. The choir fired in rage beams of crystal light carving through the void. But the Wolves shielded the bright wind, their hulls shattering under the blasts. Rhea flew through the breach they opened and aimed straight for the choir command vessel. She could feel the gate inside her head now guiding her, showing her every move like instinct. Malik shouted coordinates. Even as his vision blurred, he said, "If we hit that core, we end it." She nodded and aimed the ship into the blinding glow of the enemy heart. On the planet below, Asha watched the readings spike to impossible levels, and she whispered a farewell to the pilots above. The gate was burning brighter than the sun itself. She turned to her crew and said, "This is who we are. We fight not to destroy, but to be remembered." She closed her eyes and sent the final pulse through the network, a wave of human memory and emotion, laughter, tears, dreams, courage, all translated into light that surged through the system and struck the choir fleet like a rising dawn. The invincible ships began to fracture, not from power, but from feeling unable to contain the chaos of empathy that now flooded their cold minds. The silence of the choir broke into 1,000 voices of confusion, and for the first time in their long history, the architects of control screamed. The choir's formation collapsed into spiraling fragments, the once perfect geometry of their fleet breaking apart under waves of raw emotion that poured through the gate. Their psychic harmony shattered, every ship trembling as if alive and terrified. Rhea Calder watched the chaos unfold from the cockpit of the bright wind. The hull groaning from radiation bursts, Malik Anwar clinging to his seat as flames rippled across the panels. The choir's command vessel still stood in the center, untouched for now, its crystal heart burning with a violent light. Rhea knew that was the source, the central core that commanded every shard, every mind bound to the hive. She whispered to Malik that if they could strike it once with everything they had, the chain would break. Forever. Malik smiled weakly and said, "Then we hit it like humans do together." She tightened her grip on the controls and looked out at the Wolves' ships that had turned against their masters, their battered hulls drifting alongside hers as if waiting for a signal. On Earth, Asha Vern stood amid the trembling floor of mission control. The gate network had overloaded circuits sparking across every console, but no one fled. They all stood watching the feed of the choir fleet breaking apart. She could feel the rhythm of billions of human hearts resonating through the system. The power of belief now alive in every relay, she whispered that they had come too far to stop. Now she ordered a final pulse alignment and directed every orbital satellite, every old transmission tower, even the deep mining lasers on Mars to link into one channel. The engineers told her it would drain the planet's core reserves. She replied softly that humanity had never been good at saving energy when love was on the line. The choir responded with desperation, their ships firing at random bursts of light, slicing through the darkness like angry gods. But the wolves who had defected moved in perfect synchronization, guided by the same melody that now filled their decks. They were no longer enslaved minds, but free soldiers finding joy in their rebellion. Their commanders shouting words that had never existed in their language before, words that meant freedom and home. They formed a shield wall around the bright wind, taking blows meant for her as Rhea and Malik prepared the final run. The human pilots in the Starborn fleet joined as well, their ships glowing with resonance, the entire armada of believers converging on the choir's heart veil of the core. Drifting within the dying wreckage of the conductor saw it happen through cracked sensors. He felt the choir's scream ripple through his skull, their command collapsing. He knew this was the moment where the chains could truly be broken. Rerouted the conductor's last power core toward the choir's command vessel, transmitting one final message to Asha and Rhea saying, "I was once their voice. Now I will be their silence." The transmission cut and a burst of light erupted from his ship, the energy surge clearing a path straight through the chaos toward the choir's core. Rhea saw the opening and pushed the bright wind to full thrust, the engines shrieking as metal warped under the strain. Malik called out the range to target, 20,000 kilometers, 10-5, then nothing but light. The ship pierced through the storm of crystal shards, dodging collapsing debris, guided by the gate's rhythm. The cockpit filled with a hum that was neither mechanical nor human. It was the song of every life that had ever refused to die quietly. She could see the choir's core ahead, vast and blinding, a structure made of mirrored glass swirling like a storm. She whispered to Malik that if this was the end, it was a good one, and he answered that ends are just doors for the brave. She smiled through tears and drove the ship forward. On Earth, every screen turned white as the gate connected with the bright wind, the resonance completing the circuit across worlds and minds. Asha felt the planet tremble beneath her feet. Then, still as if holding its breath, she could see through the sensors that the sun itself had begun to shimmer, its light bending through the gate into a focused beam that struck the choir's fleet. The sound that followed was not destruction but awakening. The choir's ships cracked open, and instead of explosions came bursts of colors, pure light scattering across space like seeds. Rhea's voice echoed faintly through the comm, saying, "Tell them." We stood. Tell them we believed. Then the bright wind vanished inside the radiant storm. For a long moment there was silence. The choir's fleet gone, the wolves adrift, the human ships powerless. Asha stood, frozen, tears sliding down her face. She thought it was over. But then the gate pulsed once more, weak but alive, and from deep orbit came a whisper of static that grew into a voice. Rhea's voice, faint but real, saying, "We are not gone. We are part of it now. The bright wind is inside the light. It listens and it sings with us." She told Asha that the choir's network was collapsing and every enslaved mind was waking one by one, that they were free now, and they would remember the humans who broke their chains. The signal faded, but Asha smiled, because she knew what it meant. Humanity had not only survived, they had become part of something larger. A living echo carried through the stars. Above Earth, the remnants of the choir fleet drifted silent, their surfaces no longer cold crystal, but warm hues reflecting the light of dawn. The wolves transmitted a single salute signal to Earth and began scattering to return home, free nations reborn from the ashes. The Starborn fleet powered down their weapons engines, quiet, their mission complete. Asha looked up through the observation glass at the first sunrise after victory. The sky washed in colors she had never seen before, and whispered to herself that the galaxy would remember this day, not as the day Earth was attacked, but as the day the universe learned to fear the power of human mercy. The sun rose over Earth brighter than it had in centuries, its rays scattering through the upper atmosphere, where fragments of shattered crystal drifted like snow. Remnants of the choir's fleet turned harmless into floating mirrors that caught the light and sent it back toward the planet. People on the ground looked up and saw the sky glowing not with fire, but with reflection. Every city and ocean painted with color. Humanity had survived. The invasion. But what remained was something more than survival. Asha Verne stood on the roof of Mission Control, breathing air that smelled of ozone and rain. Her hair tangled from sleepless nights. Her eyes tired yet alive. The gate network was silent now, its energy spent, yet she could still feel its echo in her bones. A faint vibration that pulsed like a distant heartbeat. She knew what it was. The memory of connection. The rhythm of billions united for one impossible moment. She looked toward the horizon where new signals blinked in orbit. Thousands of wolf ships floating quietly, no longer enemies, no longer slaves. They had requested landing permission, their captains sending messages of gratitude written in awkward human words. Learned from intercepted transmissions phrases like, "Thank you." And we remember Asha had read them one by one, her tears falling freely, because each one was proof that the galaxy had changed forever. She turned to her second in command and said, "Bring them down." The man hesitated, saying some governments will object, they fear spies or occupation. She shook her head and said, "Fear built this war. It will not build the peace." In the sky, a burst of light appeared, a capsule entering atmosphere, streaking across the clouds. For a moment, everyone thought it was debris, but the sensors identified its signal. It was from the bright wind. Asha's heart nearly stopped as rescue craft rushed to intercept the capsule, crashed into the Pacific, sending waves. Across the horizon, ships converged, and hours later reports came through. They had found 2 life signs. One human, one alien. Asha left immediately, flying out on the first recovery shuttle when the hatch opened. She saw Malik Anwar lying pale but breathing, and beside him Kale, the young alien tactician who had once served the choir. He looked terrified of the crowd, but when Asha stepped forward and offered her hand, he took it slowly. She told him, "Welcome home," and the words made him tremble. Rhea Calder was not among the rescued. Her ship had merged with the choir's core. When the final pulse struck, she had become part of the light. Some said lost, others said ascended. Asha believed neither. She believed Rhea was still alive somewhere within the network. The first human to cross into that other space where mind and machine and memory intertwined. She ordered the scientists to begin research into the residual gate signals, saying find her not because she is gone, but because she is waiting. Malik recovered in the medical wing. His first question was, "Did we scare them?" And Asha laughed, saying we terrified them. Weeks passed and the Earth rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible. Because now they were not alone. The wolves offered technology. In exchange for learning how humans think, they wanted to understand the strange force that had shattered their masters. Entire academies were formed just to study belief itself. Cities that had once fought over borders now competed over research. Grants to explore the psychology of unity. Children in schools sang the Helios lullaby as part of history lessons, the same words that had saved the species. Believe, hold fast, keep breathing. Humanity had not only defended its world, it had defined what it meant to be human to the rest of the galaxy. One evening, Asha stood by the sea. The water calm reflecting the lights of orbiting ships. She was joined by Kale, who now served as an ambassador between species. He said the choir remnants are still out there sleeping or broken, but they will return someday. And she nodded, saying, "Then we will be ready." Not with fear, but with the same thing that defeated them. Once he asked her what that thing truly was, and she answered, "Not power, not weapons. It was the refusal to give up, the refusal to hate when hatred was expected." Kyle looked at the horizon and said, "That is what terrifies them," and she agreed. The signal from the gate returned months later, faint but unmistakable, a voice carried across, frequencies whispering through static. It was Rhea's voice, soft but steady, saying the bright wind still flies, the choir are free, and they are learning to dream. She said, "Tell them the light never ends." Then the signal faded, but Asha smiled because she knew this was not goodbye. It was proof that the Starborn spirit lived on. She sent a reply into the void saying, "We heard you, and we will keep building." Years passed, and the legend spread across the stars. New colonies carried banners with the same words humans had written during the invasion. We do not quit, we get clever, we stand together, we bring each other home. It became an oath shared not only by humans but by wolves, by freed choir, by anyone who had seen the dawn over Earth on that day of terror and triumph. Asha Vern lived to see the first Alliance Council convene on the rebuilt lunar base. Where once war had begun, the council opened with a moment of silence, not for the dead, but for the light. And when Asha looked up, she thought she saw in the shimmer of orbit a shape like the bright wind crossing the sun, its trail golden as hope itself. And so the galaxy remembered the invasion, not as a warning, but as a lesson. That belief could be more powerful than any weapon, that mercy could terrify tyrants, and that humanity born from dust could sing with the stars. When the story of the invasion finally settled into memory, the galaxy no longer looked at Earth as a fragile, blue world lost in darkness. It saw a light that refused to die. Asha Verne grew old, surrounded by students and wanderers who came from 100 races to learn from the humans who turned mercy into victory. She told them that courage was not born from strength but from choice. That belief was not a weapon but a bridge. Kale became her closest ally, working to rebuild what the choir had destroyed. Malik Anwar carried the scars of battle yet never lost his smile. He trained the next generation of Starborn pilots, telling them that bravery was not about fearlessness, but about standing anyway. When fear whispered too loud on quiet nights, Asha still listened for the faint hum of the gate. Sometimes she thought she could hear laughter drifting between the stars, the echo of Rhea Calder and the bright wind sailing through the endless dark, guiding lost ships back to light. She would whisper across the console saying, "Bring them home." And sometimes the machine seemed to answer with a flicker of gold, as if the universe itself had learned to listen from her. The Alliance spread further than anyone dreamed, reaching systems where human voices had once been myths, and wherever they went they carried one symbol, the mark of intertwined stars representing all who had fought that day. The wolves who once came to conquer became protectors of new worlds. They built cities that sang at night, resonating with the same frequencies that had once broken their chains. The freed choir fragments began to dream again, their songs blending with human music until no one could tell which had started first. What had been fear had become harmony, and the galaxy itself changed. Its rhythm life no longer moved under the rule of domination, but under the quiet law of belief. In the archives of the Starborn Corps, the final entry written by Asha Verne remained sealed for centuries. It was simple, it said, "When the universe doubts, itself look toward Earth, not for power, not for perfection, but for proof that weakness can rise and that love can outshine annihilation." Her handwriting faded with time, yet the words stayed alive, carved into the oath every Starborn pilot learned. Before flight, we do not quit, we get clever, we stand together, we bring each other home. Generations later, explorers found a signal coming from the far edge of the Orion Reach. It was faint, carrying the rhythm of a human heartbeat inside a beam of white noise. They decoded it, and the message said only this: "The bright wind sails, the path is open." The stars remember. Humanity had become more than a people. It had become a story, one that galaxies whispered when they faced their own darkness, reminder that the smallest flame could terrify the night. The sky over Earth remained full of reflections, fragments of the old choir still orbiting in quiet grace. The children born under their shimmer grew up hearing the tales of the invasion, not as tragedy but as promise. And every time someone looked at the horizon and said, "Believe," the lights in orbit seemed to flicker a little brighter, as if answering from far beyond. And so the legend ended, not with a battle, but with a sunrise humanity, standing not as conqueror, but as teacher, a voice that once trembled now strong enough to guide stars. The galaxy no longer feared Earth. It looked toward it for courage, and in every world where darkness gathered, the same oath was spoken once more. As the final echo of the Starborn era, we do not quit, we get clever. We stand together, we bring each other home. The end.